with us on this beautiful day. Today we're going to be starting Parashat Bo, Bo el Paro. So it's interesting the combination of words in this pasuk. V'yomer Hashem el Moshe, Bo el Paro, come to Pharaoh, because I had hardened his heart. So it is interesting. Precisely, there is a kind of a oxymoron here. On the one hand, you say that go to speak to Pharaoh, and I harden his heart. So what's the point of going? And this, I want to point out a beautiful comment by Rav Kook. Rav Kook, who was a lover of humanity and certainly, especially a lover of Jewish people, Rav Kook says that this shows that there is never a time in which you can say, I am too far to return to Hashem. That there is no such thing as an impossible teshuvah. He calls it lifamim adam oset teshuvah bilti efsharit. Sometimes a person can make a teshuvah that is impossible. And the impossible teshuvah is also possible. It's a beautiful idea that Pharaoh was a very wicked man, and Hashem had hardened his heart, which means he had made him not vulnerable to outside pressures. But remember that when we say that he hardened his heart, it did not mean that he made him say no, or that he made him not to recognize Hashem. That would be cruel. It would be unjust. What Hashem did was to harden his so that he will become a strong personality. Now, if I have an idea and I believe in something, but I'm weak and people talk to me and I'm afraid, so then I will change my mind. It doesn't mean that I didn't really change my mind. It's just that I'm afraid of starting over from my principles. So a person, it doesn't mean that Pharaoh, whatever Pharaoh decided in his own wickedness, not to let the Jewish people go, to deny Hashem, all of this was his own idea. All Hashem did was not to make him weak so that he could stand up for his principle. He wanted to be evil. Hashem told him, by all means, you can be evil. Hashem didn't make him evil. I want to make this clear. Ichbati et libo does not mean that Hashem decided for him what to do. He simply strengthened his character so that he could do what he wanted to do without outside influences. A beautiful principle. So in that case, we say, ask the question, so why does, nevertheless, what is the combination of these two words? Go and talk to him because I harden his heart. It shows that even though I harden his heart, you can still talk to him. You can still approach him. And that's the beautiful concept of Rav Kook, that you can never give up on somebody, even on yourself. And when things appear impossible, I've done so much evil, I've hurt so many people. How can I ever do tshuva? The answer is you can still do. And that's the beautiful line of Rav Kook. Lifamim adam oset tshuva bilti efsharit. Sometimes a person makes the tshuva that is impossible. In Orot tshuva. And an example of this is Menashe. Menashe was a very wicked king. And yet, he was able to do tshuva. In fact, it is a tshuva of Menashe, the king Menashe, which became emblematic, an example of the mercy of Hashem. And we have to remember that Hashem wants, as we say in the Tefillah of Yom Kippur, Hashem wants people to be able to return. He doesn't want people to be punished or to kill them. So therefore, in this story, I think we can see the beauty of this insight of Rav Kook. The next point that I wanted to make is, the purpose of the plagues was so that people will know all the greatness of Hashem. As we discussed in previous shurim, the fact that Hashem was making supernatural phenomena, unexpected, climactic, social, zoological phenomena that could never happen before, and it would have been impossible to happen, like hail. But to show that Hashem was able to control nature, that Hashem was able to control nature because he was the creator of nature. And that is the main message that Hashem wants to send to Pharaoh. And as we discussed in the past, this was as it says here, Vidatem ki ani Hashem, so that people will know, you will know that I am God, that I am the Lord, that the sovereign of the world. The belief in Hashem is essentially a belief that he governs the world, not just that he created the world and abandoned it. It's something like an absent power that no longer is concerned with this world, like the demiurge of pagan times. No, Hashem is like a king, or now like a president. He's in charge of the affairs of the country every day. He is the person, ultimate responsibility for what's going on in the country. And Hashem is also a melech who is ultimately responsible for whatever happens in the world, or the universe. In fact, that is the main part of our emunah. Not only that God exists, but also that he is the king. A point of halacha, if a person says a bracha, Baruch atah Hashem, Borei Peri Ha'etz, he did not fulfill the obligation, because he did not say Melech Haolam, Elokeinu Melech Haolam. The fact that the Melech Malchut is an ingredient sine qua non of the bracha, without which the bracha is not correct. And so we see here that the aspect that Hashem wants to impress on Pharaoh and on the world is that he governs the world. That everything happens because he manages it. And I want to point out that, as Rashi says, and the Midrash says, "Uleman tesaper beoznei," I'm sorry, so that you will actually tell everybody what happened here. I mean, who? Pharaoh is going to go around preaching that there's a God in the world? That's not maybe the intention. That could have been the result. But Hashem probably knew that the nations of the world were not ready to accept this message yet. Yet humanity, Hashem wanted this message to go to humanity. It was going to Pharaoh, going to the nations of the world. But unfortunately, the nations of the world could not actually conceive or accept that concept yet. So who was the plagues for? For the Jewish people. So in other words, although the message was for humanity, for mankind, for everyone, Israel is the witness that will carry that message to mankind throughout the generations. It's a beautiful idea that Hashem chose the highest civilization in the world to impose the message that there's a God in the world, there is a creator in the world, and there is a governor in the world. So that the world will be able to become familiar and to become aware of what Hashem means. Now I want to point out to the next point here that it says that at the beginning of the message, when Hashem sends Moshe, he says to him, "I know that Pharaoh will not listen to you. Lo ishma paro." So Lo yishma means he will not hear you. It doesn't mean that he will not um, accept what you say or agree with you. It simply means he will not hear you. So that is going to be the ultimate, the time when Pharaoh will no longer want to hear you. Until that time, you will be able to talk to him. But when he will say, I do not want to hear you anymore, then that's the end. Then there is no more hope and there's no more attempt. That is exactly why at the end of this parasha, when Pharaoh gets very upset with Moshe, and he says to him, "Don't talk to me anymore. Don't. I don't want to see you anymore here." Um, so it says, "Vayomer lo Pharaoh, go away from here. Do not continue. Never see me again. The day that I see you, you will die." So Moshe says, "You're right. I will not see you anymore." How did Moshe know that this was the end? How did he say, "Yeah, I'm gonna"? Yes, he was angry with Pharaoh. Pharaoh can say whatever he wants, but if Hashem is going to come and tell him, "Go and talk to Pharaoh again," he would definitely have to. So, on what basis did Moshe here says, "Yes, you're right. I will not see you anymore"? How did he know that? The answer is that Hashem told him, you will continue talking to him until the day that he says, "I don't want to hear you anymore." When this time comes, then you know that the end is here. And now will come the final plague and the redemption. So it's interesting that the slavery in Egypt was sort of dependent on this possible obedience or listening to by Pharaoh. So when Pharaoh expresses his refusal even to hear Moshe's message, that is the limit of what Hashem will tolerate. So long, and that is also a beautiful message for us. A person sometimes can, not make the right decision, can fool around, can be rebellious, but there is a little bit of a sort of a something. He's saying no, but he's not hearing, not listening. The moment a person refuses even to hear the message, he breaks the relationship, severs the bond that could actually create a dialogue, then there's nothing more to talk about. That is also true in our lives as well. So long as a person is willing to discuss and talk, there is an option, hope. When people no longer want to talk to each other, there's nothing more to discuss. And that's the end of the relationship. We can have a relationship with a person we disagree with. You can have a relationship with a person that you don't like, or he doesn't like you, so long as there is a possibility of a dialogue where people can talk. When there's no more conversation, when people do not want to listen to one another, then there is no more relationship. I want to address now a very interesting question in this parasha, and that is a famous question that comes on chapter 11, when Moshe Rabbeinu says to the Jewish people, "Go and ask the Egyptians for jewelry, silver, gold, utensils, and ask for it." Let's take a look at the verse. Chapter 11, verse 2, if you have the Chumash with you. "Please speak in the ears of the people. Let each man request of his fellow and each woman from her fellow silver vessels and gold vessels." And Hashem granted the people favor in the eyes of Egypt, and Moshe was famous in the eyes of people. it so happened that it's going to happen again in the end, where they actually are going to um, ask for these objects, and they're going to be given the objects. Just want to point out quickly. Um, in chapter 12, verse 36, it says that the people carried out the word of Moses, and they requested from the Egyptians silver vessels and gold vessels and garments. And Hashem gave the people favor in the eyes of the Egyptians, and they granted the request. And they emptied up Egypt. So the legal problem and moral problem that we encounter here is the word request really means borrow. In Hebrew, she'elah means to ask somebody for something that you're going to return. Yet we know that in this case, they were not going to return. And many of the rabbis wonder, how could this be done? I mean, this seems to be, dishonest. So, first of all, there's an opinion of Ibn Ezra. Ibn Ezra says that no explanation is needed. It's Hashem who says, go ask them and you take it. Because Hashem is the one who, all the money, all the financial wealth comes from Hashem. He gives it to whoever he wants and takes it from whomever he wants and gives it to whomever he wants. Not distributes money, gives it. And so it happens. So if in this case, Hashem says the money should go to Am Yisrael from the Egyptians, there's no other question. A little bit, it happens to us also. Why do some people get wealthy and some people get poor? Hashem decides. So that's the opinion of Ibn Ezra, no question. The rabbis, however, are troubled by this, and they try to find the various explanations. I want to give you some of them. First of all, Rashbam says that in reality, this was not borrow, it was ask. Ask, you say, I want it. What the Egyptian gave it to them, it's up to them. And as the Torah says, the Egyptians were happy with the Jewish people. They found grace in their eyes. The reason probably being, as this is coming on the heels of the 9th plague, which was Makat Choshech, the darkness, in which the Egyptians were helpless because they could not see anything or go anywhere, eat or do anything. And the Jews came to their homes and helped them. So they were grateful for them. In addition, as the Torah mentions, Moshe Rabbeinu was warning the Egyptians when the plagues were going to come. The Egyptians knew that the culprit really was not Moshe or God, it was Pharaoh. They understood there was something wrong in this setup of slavery. It seemed to be wrong that these people that were nice people were treated with such cruelty. I want to point out that people in general have an internal compass of morality. And they would not be capable of doing highly cruel, genocidal plans. And that's why every dictator who wants to destroy the Jews or destroy any nation has to demonize the person first. There's a propaganda that makes these people not human beings, or give the sense that they represent such a threat to the safety and security of you, that eliminating them and killing them is actually moral. It's something that normally would not be permissible or acceptable. So in a way, the Rashbam says, no, the Egyptians understood that this was wrong, and that's why they were giving them the gifts as gifts. She'ilah l'shem matana. Another explanation, and in fact, we see here that in chapter the Midrash says on this verse that the Egyptians wanted to give them, why does the verse say, if you look at the succession of verses, it says the children of Israel carried the word of Moshe, and they requested, and Hashem says, gave the people favor in the eyes of the Egyptians, and they granted the request. Why is this a mention? Okay, it would have been enough to say, they carried out the word of Moshe. Why does it have to repeat? The people like the Israel. Imagine you say to somebody took away something from you, and you're going to be happy with them. You like them. The Midrash says that the reason the Torah mentions this here is that not only were the Egyptians willing to part with some of their stuff, but they actually said to them, take more, please. They wanted them to take more. It may be because they wanted them to get out, take and go away. But either way, the idea that the Egyptians were willing to go and give it to them, so there's no problem in the legality of this issue. Another explanation that is very beautiful, we come in the Gemara and Sanhedrin, which is a logical answer, is that after being slaves for hundreds of years, parents, children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, they were in reality deserving of some payment for all the work that they had done. They had not received the due payment. And so when they took the money, it was really their right. It was their money. The gold and silver jewelry of the Egyptians was part of the resources and the estate which they had built on the back of these cheap, free labor of the slaves. So that the Gemara explains that there's nothing immoral about it because they were taking their money. But I want to give you one more explanation, which I think is going to give, the Or HaChaim suggests this, and here I want to give you a general theme about this parasha, which I'd like to carry through. And that is that Hashem does everything here before they leave Egypt to make them leave with a head held high and high. To live as proud human beings, free men and women, not slaves running away, escaping, fleeing in shame. In fact, the Torah says they left in the middle of the day, a caravan, a march, proud, without fear. This is a very important aspect because Hashem wanted them not to live as slaves. They're not slaves. The Jewish people are the paradigm of freedom. We were slaves, but we're not slaves anymore. We left slavery behind. If we remember slavery, it's only to remind us how great Hashem is in having liberated us. But the liberation of Hashem is not only at that time. It's a liberation that lasts forever. Once Hashem liberated us from Egypt, He made us free forever. And in fact, as we know from history, the Jewish people was never enslaved by any other nation. They were persecuted, they were executed, they were killed, but politically, they were not slaves of any government. Even in the Middle Ages, where the majority of the citizenry was actually in the feudal states The people were slaves who could not move away out from the land. The Jewish people were merchants, tradesmen, they could move anywhere. The Jews never were slaves. So the Or HaChaim explains that the reason that Hashem wanted them to have money was precisely that they should feel like free men. A man who's poor, who's dependent on others, who's constantly has to beg, doesn't feel free. He's dependent. Freedom means to have the means to support yourself without having to rely and beg anyone else. So that is the reason. I mean, and this is something general that we have to understand, that the happiness in life is also to be able to achieve or to attain financial independence, a little bit of comfort, a little bit of aesthetic beauty, to a person who dresses with nice clothes, clean clothes. You don't have to be super luxurious, but you have to be nice. This is what makes people happy. Put a person with dirty clothes, smelly, old, broken, and he will feel inside equally broken, meaningless, and unworthy. So part of the system of making the Jews, Bnei Israel, feel strong, to give them money and to nice clothes. They left Egypt like princes. One more point that I also is brought out. It says, "Vayinatzu et Mitzrayim," they emptied out Egypt. The word "Vayinatzlu" is connected to the word "Hatzalah," it means to save them, and that also may be the reason why the Egyptians were so eager in giving them the gifts, and that is that they felt guilty, felt that they had committed a crime. So the verse says that by their giving up some of their possessions and giving it to their former slaves, they were saved by Yenatzru Mitzrayim. They became, at least they were able to pay for what they had done. By Yenatzru Mitzrayim. And that may be another reason why there's no immorality in taking all these objects. We go to another subject, and that is also on the same theme of freedom, and that's the Korban Pesach, the sacrifice of the lamb. It's actually interesting that is immediately here, before they leave, they have to take this animal and slaughter it and eat it together. And we know all the laws of the Korban Pesach have also as their aim to highlight the fact that they were free. These are people who were enslaved by the Egyptians, who could not, have an opinion or move one foot in front of the other without the Egyptians telling them what to do. And yet now they could take the lamb, which the Egyptians worshipped as a god, they would not eat it, but they thought the gods were in those animals, and they would actually take it apart for 4 days and say, the Egyptians would ask, "What are you doing with this?" So, "Oh yeah, we're going to slaughter it. Hashem told us just to keep it for 4 days, and the 4th day we're going to slaughter it." And they were not embarrassed, they were not afraid. And to take it, and the way they eat it, you have to eat it roasted. But if you cook it in a pot, nobody knows. No, is that what it is? No, roasted outside. Make everybody clearly see what it is. In Argentina, a few years ago, we went to a place in the south and the Patagonia where they sell a special kind of lamb that is called Patagonian lamb. It's a very great delicacy for the Argentinians. Unfortunately, there were no kosher restaurants that offer that beautiful animal. An animal completely open on the grill. You could see the legs, the head, everything was there. And so this was the Korban Pesach. You could not cut anything. Slaughter it and roast it. Everybody should see what it is. And you eat it, and you have to do the bones. Another law, by the way, of the Korban Pesach is to show you that you are free, that you are not afraid. Another one is not to leave it overnight. You have to eat the whole thing. Because poor people never eat everything. They always worry about tomorrow. They leave a little bit. No leftovers. No worry about tomorrow. So these laws are meant to emphasize the one point, and that is that they're free men and that they're entitled to do this. I want to touch on two other subjects. One of them, an important one, and that is the question: what was the Pesach for? When we celebrate Pesach today, we have a korban. We don't have it anymore, but in the temple there used to be a korban called the Pesach. And we ate it on the night of the Seder. Now, what do we say? What is the Seder, the Pesach for? It's for the fact that Hashem skipped Pesach on the houses of the Jews and did not kill the firstborn. So the whole meaning of Pesach is that we are going to remember the miracle. However, they're eating the Pesach now before Hashem did the miracle. The same thing with the matzah. They have to eat matzah on that night in Pesach in Egypt. And what was the matzah for? Matzah was for the bread. When Hashem took them, they did not give them time for the dough to rise. But this happened the next morning. Now they're eating it. They're eating it Thursday night, the night before. Why are we having Pesach and Matzah when these events did not yet, the events that we remember didn't even yet happen? So there are two observations that I want to make. Number one, the Egyptians, the Jews, in Egypt, were already beginning the process of Pesach. They're the first generation that gave us Pesach. And all we do is we commemorate and celebrate generation after generation the same event. A very important point. When you observe Pesach, you're not doing it you're not doing something yourself. You're simply repeating something that was done in the previous generations and generations before. Thousands of years. We're sort of going over. So now comes the question. We understand that we can remember it, but why are they doing it? So the Chaim makes a very beautiful point, which has some Kabbalistic interpretations, and I'd like to tell you what he says. The Chaim says that it is not when they were having the Pesach, eating the lamb the way that Hashem told them to eat it, on the night before they're leaving, with the matzah, before the day happened when they did not have time to bake the bread, it was not to remember what happened because it yet had not happened. On the contrary, what happened subsequently was as a result of their observing that mitzvah. Pay attention. It is not to remember what Hashem did. It was because we did what we did that Hashem did what He did. That is the novelty in this. The merit. And that also shows that we sometimes don't understand what the mitzvot are. We think that a mitzvah is, oh, well, remember what happened then. Maybe the mitzvah has much deeper significance and mystical, spiritual, that we may not be able to even comprehend. So in our own little minds, We say, yeah, well, this mitzvah is because of this or because of that. So we have to give it sort of an explanation. But explanation may not be correct. The real explanation may be much more profound, maybe beyond the limits of our own intellect. So Hashem, in His kindness, gives us mitzvot that are comprehensible to us, and it attaches it to events that are intelligible. But in reality, the meaning of the mitzvah may have other cosmic significance, psychological significance of greater impact, much more than what we think it is. And so again, when they were eating the Pesach the night before they left, before Hashem had already would skip over their houses, before the event actually took place, certainly it was not to commemorate anything, but it was that they should have the miracle of the skipping, of Hashem skipping over their houses, and that they should take them out into freedom, that they should happen because of the merit of their actions. And here we learn an important aspect of cause and effect. What is the cause? What is the first thing? And what is the second? So we tend to think that Hashem took us out of Egypt, so we celebrate the holiday to remember it. In reality, it could be the other way around. It's because Hashem, we observe what Hashem told us to do, that Hashem did the freedom that followed. I want to point out another interesting aspect, and this general theme that we're talking about, freedom and the importance of freedom. We know that matzah in itself was the bread of the slaves. We say halachmania. This is the bread of affliction. Our forefathers ate in the land of Egypt. Chametz, on the other hand, represents independence, freedom, being on our own. We don't have to worry about, we're not in a rush, but take our time. The nature of a slave can never finish anything. It's always pushed by other circumstances. The nature of a freedom, independence, is that you have time. You're not rushed. Nobody's rushing you. That's a sign of a free man. So there's an interesting question. If the whole idea is to emphasize our freedom, why is it that on Pesach we eat the matzah that represents slavery? We've been saying until now that all the laws of Pesach are all the events surrounding the Exodus are intended to drive home the concept that we are free, that we are like princes and princesses, and that there is a dignity and so on. So the question is, if that is the case, then why are we eating matzah? So this is a question that has troubled me for a long time, and Rav Hirsch gives a part of this explanation, and I will sort of summarize it a little bit, adding some of my own concepts. The matzah represents the process of the time, the transition from slavery to freedom. What the matzah reminds us is that we were making the bread of the slaves, but we had time. We were able, rather, to do our own bread. We were free. It's Hashem who took us out and didn't let us finish the process of leavening. So the matzah represents not slavery in itself. Matzah represents the time when we are beginning to become free, from slavery to freedom. And who is the one who gives us the freedom? Hashem. So the message of the matzah is that if you have bread on Pesach, and you think that the freedom is something that you created yourself and you can have it at any time, that is an error. People sometimes lose their freedom, run away from freedom. They're afraid of freedom. They fear freedom. They prefer to be slaves. And so the idea of having a matzah means that it is how we obtain our independence, to realize where and how and why we became free, and never forget that message, that we arise to freedom and independence when we lack the ability to achieve independence because there was a power that pushed us forward. And it was only through the power of God that allowed us to become free. The chametz by itself denies or hides the godly origin of liberty, of what is our freedom. The chametz, in a sense, says, we're free, don't worry about it. We don't need to worry anymore. He claims freedom is a human achievement. And that is why whoever eats chametz and Pesach gets a tremendous punishment, the excision. Why is it so severe? Because the person who eats chametz and Pesach is saying, I can make freedom by myself, I don't need God. And that is the error. Without God, there's no freedom. We've seen many societies in history that have abandoned giving up their freedom willingly to dictators, to social movements. Of course, eventually people wake up, but for a long time, people become subjected to these kind of tyrannies until it's too late. It happened in Germany. It happened, in fact, the whole idea of the philosopher Hegel suggests the idea that there are slaves in the world. Why are there slaves? Because there were people who were willing to say, all right, you give me money, you give me food, you give me protection, and I'll serve you. And that's why the whole nobility was always the warrior, the one who rode a horse. He protected you. He gave you food, but you were his slave. And that's how slavery started. When people abandon, they think that freedom came by itself. But when you eat a matzah, you realize that the freedom can only be achieved because there is a God in the world. I want to end with, we have so much to talk about today. So I want to end with one beautiful line. This, by the way, another lesson that we have in this parasha is the mitzvah of tefillin. And the tefillin also is connected to the concept that there is a God in the world who took us out of Egypt. Every morning, we actually put on the tefillin to demonstrate that God liberated us. And it's interesting that in rabbis, rabbinical scholars discuss why is it that the tefillin are put on the left hand? Well, if you're a lefty, you put it on the right hand. You put it on the weaker hand. Why on the weaker hand? So the rabbis give several explanations for this, but the Torah says there that the tefillin remind you that God took you out of Egypt with a strong hand. A strong hand means that God imposes justice in the world, justice on the enslavers. Liberation means to punish the enslaver, so he doesn't enslave you anymore. So part of their freedom was to punish the Egyptians, and that's a yad chazakah. Now, in Kabbalah, the right hand represents the chesed, represents the kindness of Hashem. The left side represents the strict justice, which is represented by the yad chazakah, the strong hand. So that's why the strong arm of Hashem is the one that was enabled us to go into freedom. And so that's what the tefillin, in a way, by putting it on that side, on the left side, which means on the side that Hashem Hashem imposes justice in the world, reminds us of Egypt in a very simple way. In addition to the text inside that actually talks about the liberation from Egypt, the fact that it is left put on the left hand is a daily reminder that God took us out of Egypt. That God actually is a source of our freedom. There's a lot more to talk about. We learn in the Talmud, actually this week, we learn that if a master of a slave puts a tefillin on him, then that means that the slave is free. It's a very nice, beautiful image that we're going to give here too, that the tefillin represent freedom. Freedom from all influences. Freedom. Because Hashem made us free. I want to point out that, as a general comment, we live in a very difficult time now in the world in which there's a imposition of strong ideas that it's only one way of thinking, a little bit like it happened in other countries. But if you think differently from the mainstream, you are branded madman or fool or brainwash or whatever you're called. And the idea is here, you cannot be free. You have to toe the line, follow what everybody says. And if you're not, then something is wrong with your mind. I've been in Russia, I've been in Germany. People are going to educate us into how to think. That is the loss of freedom. And that's why I believe in this time, this message of freedom, the connection with Hashem, is to remember there's Hashem that makes us free. That not men, not the American Constitution or the rights of man in France. This is not to make us free. What makes us free is to believe that man is created in the image of God. He has an internal dignity that nobody can take away from you. I want to end with a beautiful story. In chapter 13, chapter 13, verse 13, almost towards the end of the Parasha, talks about the concept of the Pidyon Haben, actually, the firstborn. We know that the firstborn were smitten in Egypt, the last plague. That was one of the great tragedies that happened in Egypt. And so to remember that event also, we take the firstborn of every human and we redeem it. So we assume that he has a certain holiness, a certain status. Similarly, we do this with animals. Any firstborn animal from a livestock, you have to, it's called the Bechor, you have to make it a sacrifice. And you bring it to the temple as a sacrifice. But then something interesting happens. This obviously refers to animals that can be sacrificed in the temple. Not every animal could be sacrificed. Obviously, it can only be what we call the kosher animals. So first lamb, first cow, you bring it. But what happens? In the Torah here mentions the first issue, donkey. A donkey. It's also a bechor. Well, you're going to take care, what are you going to do with it? If you're going to give it any kind of special status, you cannot bring it to the temple. The temple, you cannot bring a donkey. So the Torah says, well, in that case, you cannot bring it to the temple. You redeem it against a lamb, and then you bring the lamb. The donkey then now is released from its holiness, and the lamb is brought to the temple as a sacrifice in lieu of the donkey. The question is, what is this about the donkey that we have to worry about? What is new about the donkey? That why is different from a lion, a camel, or any other animal? So Rashi gives two explanations. Um, one explanation is that the word chamor is related to the word chomer, matter, physical matter, and that we are going to live in a generation towards the end of when the Mashiach comes, in a generation that is going to be very materialistic. Zohar says that it will have, like the chamor, outside it looks like a non-kosher animal, but inside he has a certain kind of, and that is also true in general of of generation of the time of the Mashiach. People who are going to look terrible, but who from outside, but inside they're going to have some spirituality that is very worthwhile. And that's why the chamor is the animal on which the Mashiach comes. Mashiach comes riding on a donkey. Why Davka on a donkey? Because the donkey is the representation of this kind of generation that has looked terrible, and yet it contains a lot of spiritual meaning inside. And the last explanation of Rashi is that the donkeys were singled out as special animals, and that the firstborn had a special sanctity in a way, even though it could not be realized in sacrifice. But it had to be taken into account. Why? Because when we left Egypt, we left with so much treasures, so much stuff that the donkeys had to carry it. So since the donkeys helped us, we have to acknowledge them and recognize it and be grateful to them. So now you would say, what is this? The donkey? What is the donkey? Why the donkeys know anything? They just, you put something and they carry. They didn't know what they were carrying. So we learn an important lesson here. If somebody does something good to you, even though he may not know that he did it, he may not even have his intention, but through him, something good came about, then you have to show gratitude to this person. The donkey may not have known what they were doing, but because they did us a favor, a very important favor in coming out of Egypt, we have to acknowledge it for generations. And this is also another aspect of the infinity of gratitude, of this quality of gratitude that we have to experience. And with this, we conclude the class of Parashat Bo. Please remember that next week, on January 26th, I will not be here, but I will be teaching the class on the Tuesday following that, February 2nd.